Hello, everyone. This is Josh Carr with Real Angle, and today we are talking to Joseph Ouellette. Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I didn't know
Good.
your podcast had a name now.
It does. No, I named it. I named it somewhere around episode 3 or 4. I built a fancy logo and I gave it a name, and it's all professional and stuff. I don't know.
Wow.
Yeah,
Getting
getting.
legit over here.
I know. Well, I did use AI to generate the logo though, so still either that's very high tech or I'm just too cheap to pay someone, but I guess it gets us to the same place. Um, anyway, so I always like to start with the basics, which is you're at Standard Communities, you're Chief Operating Officer, correct?
That's right.
Great. And because everyone always asks me, if you're curious on the web address, it's standard-communities.com. I always like to get that out there because invariably the first thing everyone does is just go to the internet. So how long have you been at Standard?
7 years.
Cool. And what were you always chief operating officer, or did you have a different job function, or?
I had a different job function about 6 years ago, I guess. This is my second stint at Standard. Um, Now I'm chief operating officer, but before that, I was a deal partner, was our original kind of regional deal partner over here. And I'm a long time kind of deal junkie. Spent, I guess I've bought, sold, redeveloped over 15,000 apartments across the country between, my different stops along the way. So been a lot involved in a lot of transactions over the years.
That's a lot of product. If you don't mind me asking, how have you found the transition from being a deal guy to being more of a C-level type position?
That's a great question. It was definitely a struggle for me originally. When I stepped away from the business, the deal side of the business, about 5 years ago, my intention at that point was really to try to transition from a human doing into a human being because so much of my life was built around transactions. So many of my relationships were built around transactions. And I had a productive 2+ years doing that. But, it's ironic. It's kind of like riding a bike. When I came back to Standard in this new capacity, this new role, my immediate reaction, because so much of my identity and worth internally for a long time had been tied up around doing deals, making
Sure,
deals happen.
sure.
I immediately tried to insert myself in every area around deal making I could, just to kind of feel more maybe justified or safe in my existence.
Sure,
And
sure.
luckily, we've got two great founders over here that protected me from myself and quickly kind of pulled me out of that as fast as they could, because we had so many other important things to focus on as an organization, given our growth trajectory. So now I think I've really settled in the role probably in the last, call it, 18 months, and it's different for sure. I'm
Sure,
definitely on external calls and in external meetings a lot less, and it's much more internal work for me,
sure.
and supporting the team and thinking through kind of our workflow and our strategic moves around heading into different markets or opening up different business units. But I enjoy it. I really love building things. I'm a builder at heart. I've been put on probation multiple times at home from my family because, I'll build a new home and then I'll spend the next, 2 years doing renovations and additions to it. And they'll be like, come on, what's the story here? We just built this house. Why are you
Right.
still making improvements to it?
We're
And I just,
done. We're done.
yeah,
Sure. Just enjoy the
I
house.
just don't know how to stop growing, developing, and building. And so it's really, this role I think has been a good fit for me in that capacity.
No, it's interesting hearing you say all of this because that transition from being a deal guy to being C-level type role, what you've described there, I've heard that multiple times throughout my career, that's a major transition and it's a different way of thinking about things. It's not thinking about the deal, it's thinking about the organization, and that's just a different process and a different part of the brain. And some people don't like it. Some people don't want to make that transition and they're just like, hey, I like doing deals and I'm done. And that's just, you got to ask yourself what role you want to be in. So you did mention markets and you mentioned that you were a partner, you were a market partner, you were in one market. So how many markets are you, the company is in today? I mangled that sentence, but how many markets are
No,
you
I
in?
got you. I got you. We're in 16 or 17 states, I want to say right now, plus the District of Columbia.
Okay.
And based on where our current pipeline is, we would be in north of 20 states, by this time next year. So we're pretty spread out around the country. We have kind of four core offices. I'm here in Washington, D.C. with about 20 people. One of the two co-founders is in New York with about 15 people, and then the other co-founder is in L.A. with our largest office, which is around 30 people. And then we also have a significant office and presence in Chicago and Orange County, California as well.
Now, is there much from a deploying capital, from looking at deals from a growth standpoint? Are you like, how do you think about it? Is each office is kind of running and doing the best deal they can do in their market, or are you more saying, hey, we're really loving the Northeast, so we're going to try to allocate more capital towards the Northeast? Like, what's the because you're sitting in more of a strategic role, so how are you thinking about it, I guess?
Yeah, so when we first started, we definitely were more in kind of the traditional merchant developer Trammell Crow type of model where we were thinking about things regionally. And yeah, I was the first kind of regional development partner we ever had, and we expanded from there. And then ultimately, when I left, I think we had to kind of rethink our business, and we began to kind of centralize things at that point. Plus, we were pretty well established at that point, and as much as we, like any other buyer, want to buy every deal off market, we really actually value and respect the brokerage community. And so we've established some really deep relationships in the brokerage community, and we see most deals now, regardless of where we sit, that makes sense for us based upon that. And so no, now we're essentially handling, we have three core business units, if you will. We have a LIHTC AC redev unit. We have a LIHTC new construction unit, and we also have an essential housing, which is a workforce housing investment management platform. And each one of the leaders of those groups actually sit in different offices, but cover the entire country.
And I was going to ask about that because I did look at your website before we got on the line here, of course. When you talk about essential housing and workforce, so that's market rate stuff. You're not using low income housing tax credit money, but you may be using, there might be an affordable housing component possibly. Like, what does that mean to you when you say essential housing?
Yeah, I mean, it can be a hodgepodge of things. Really, we think about it as an investment management platform. Historically, we hadn't been in the investment management business. We had focused on using our own capital, or kind of past the hat, friends and family money
Sure.
when we needed capital. But we were pretty much self-funded. And then in the last, call it 3 years, just because of our scale and our reputation, we've raised a CRA fund and now a GP co-investment fund. And so it's really focused on deals that we can't bring the traditional affordable housing subsidies like low-income housing tax credits and project-based Section 8 and tax exemptions to, and get creative. I mean, unfortunately, really no dedicated resources out there to kind of serve that 80% to 100% AMI sweet spot, the workforce housing.
Sure.
And so we've been able to get creative with both kind of our public-private partnerships and our investor relationships to find some opportunities to do some things that normally wouldn't hit one of our sweet spots. But in that portfolio, we have a hodgepodge of things. We do have actually some Section 8 properties that just don't make sense to resyndicate with tax credits based upon, kind of land bases and location and things like that.
Sure.
And
Just
then we
running a Section
also,
8. Yeah.
right. And then we've also, purchased GP interests in existing portfolios with the eye to maybe down the road, buying out partners and potentially looking at resyndicating those deals with tax credits. And we've done other creative things. It's really, it's a creative vehicle for us that's been growing like crazy. And we think there's no shortage of opportunity in that workforce housing space for groups like ours that are really well heeled from a capital standpoint and are super creative in kind of the things that we bring to the table.
So I guess I have two follow-up questions on that. One is you mentioned CRA, that's Community Reinvestment Act. So those investors would be banks because they're the ones who care about CRA. Um, what other kind of institutions are you working with? Pension funds, life cos? Like, where is this money generally coming from?
No, I mean, we don't really do a ton of business with those groups. It's, we do a lot of business with the banks.
Okay,
Banks typically are low-income housing tax credit investors as well, again, because of CRA needs.
sure.
And then on the debt side, most of what we're doing is with Fannie and Freddie. We do a little bit with FHA, but, we try to, there's speed of execution, pricing, recourse. There's just so many benefits to working with the government sponsored
With Fannie and Freddie.
enterprises. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean one side benefit, which I'm sure you're aware of in today's market, is just that so many, at least in my market, the Northeast, so many traditional commercial banks, it seems just basically said we're done. Like, I mean, a lot of them have pulled out of the market and slowed down. So the fact that you're doing Fannie and Freddie, that's good because in a lot of markets they're the only game in town right now. It's interesting how many commercial banks have decided that they want to not be in commercial real estate lending until they figure out what the heck is going on. Um,
To figure out what to
so
do with their office portfolios.
yeah, no, exactly. Office portfolios and a lot of other stuff that blew up. Yeah, no, it definitely it's an interesting market. So, okay, so I get a sense for, it's a mix of funding, right? You've got some self-funded stuff, you've got some, pass the hat, so to speak, so high net worth stuff. The investment management platform is a very natural outgrowth. Again, that kind of makes sense in like the life cycle of a business of yours. I'm curious just because you mentioned a bunch of different markets. I mean, one thing I've been watching over the last few years is it feels like a lot of people have all decided at the same time that rent control is a good idea again. And I think we as a nation have seen that rent control was really big in the 70s. And then somewhere by the 90s, people are like, hey, this isn't really serving the public policy goals we thought it was going to achieve. And then everyone's like, that's bad. And now it seems like we've rediscovered rent control again. Is that an issue in the markets you're operating in? Like, where are you seeing the pendulum swinging, if you will?
Yeah, it's not a huge issue for us because, 90, call it 2, 3% of our business is restricted affordable housing already. So we're already dealing with rent restrictions.
Sure,
It's interesting to watch that happen, right? There's any number of studies out there that have shown kind of it's bad public policy, right? Um, but I think it's just really an outcry from a lot of these jurisdictions who are feeling, maybe trapped a little bit in a corner.
sure,
Like the demand for affordable workforce housing has just continued to explode year after year, and there's limited resources, right? The worst kept secret in real estate, right? With affordable market rate, it costs the same to build it, if not more. It costs the same to operate it, if not more. The only thing that's different is the rents are a lot lower. So you've got to plug that gap somehow.
sure.
And so, unless you're, a major metropolitan area that's collecting, housing trust fund dollars from transfer taxes on every real estate transaction, a lot of these jurisdictions around the country just don't have the means to kind of plug that gap. And so I think a lot of them are reacting to this idea, hey, we need to help our constituents by controlling rents, and that's gonna work out for us in the long run. And I think study after study has shown, right, when you disincentivize owners and developers from investing in their properties, which at the end of the day, investors are looking for a return on their capital, right?
Of
And
course.
so they need to see rent growth or NOI growth. And when you disincentivize to do them, you either you see a slowdown in investment in real estate, and over time, right, that real estate becomes less and less valuable because of that dynamic.
Right.
So,
Deferred maintenance piles up. No, it's interesting. I've had some conversations with some politicians over the years who are politically relatively left of center, and they may, on one hand, publicly say that they're doing rent control, but then when you just talk to them one on one, the conversation rapidly turns to some variation of, hey, we're not saying this is actually a good idea. It's just simply this is the best idea we have. Like we're working with a stressed out system, so we're doing what we can. No, it's interesting. I mean, look, I have a bias. I'm a New York native, and New York City's been king of rent control for decades. So it's something that probably I'm more attuned to. But your point about how since so much of your stuff is income restricted, your income, I mean, or sort of rent restricted, you're rent restricted anyway, so it's kind of a non-issue. So one question I always like to ask people, and I realize you're not in the weeds as much necessarily, but still like to ask it. So, like, what's the secret sauce? By that I mean, you look at a deal, a bunch of other players look at a deal. If you win the deal, by definition, you paid more than the other guy, generally, right? Or you gave better terms. So like what works for standard communities that doesn't work for other entities? Like what rings your bell, so to speak, as a firm?
Um, I mean, when you ask me that question, a couple of things come to mind. You know, the old adage that time kills all deals. So what we're really good at over here is moving fast. We really pride ourselves in understanding transaction timelines, communicating those timelines to the stakeholders outside, and then meeting those timelines. And that's won us a lot of grace and favor and reputational um, brand, if you will, from brokers and sellers and government agencies. And I think our ability to do that really comes down to kind of a core value that exists over here is sweating the details. We are, you know, I think by nature, doing real estate deals, right? You have to be a problem solver because there's always, you know, there's always a million reasons not to do a deal, right? You just need to find those handful of reasons that make sense, and you need to protect them and diligence them. And so, and you're going to have to firefight because something's going to come up. Your appraisal didn't come back where you needed it, or your investor dropped out the last minute, or you know the management company won't do the deal at that fee, whatever it is, something's going to
Sure,
come up. And
sure.
so you're constantly problem solving. And I think while why we are one of the most effective problem solvers in the affordable housing space is because we're so focused on the details. Like that's really something that we look for in people. Because at the end of the day, the more you understand the details at every level, the better you're going to be at brainstorming potential solutions that can move things, you know, from point A to point Z. And I believe there's always a solution. It may not be the solution that feels the best to you or to someone, but there's always solutions to be had. And we generally find with our financial partners and our construction partners, we can always kind of find common ground with them eventually. I think everybody's motivated to move the deal forward and get it done. And so just by understanding like their business models, what their motivations are, what their timelines are, it really helps us kind of find solutions that work well for everyone.
Well, I imagine one of the benefits here is that since you're not that your deals are cookie cutter per se, but since you're doing a lot of the same thing again and again and again and again, you start to figure out the right ways to handle those crises as they happen. And your comment about making brokers, having done a little bit of brokerage in my career early on, the fact that you're dealing with a buyer who actually will get to the finish line is huge, especially in today's market when just everything's a lot of stuff has fallen down at the last minute. So that's well put. It's well put. It's interesting. So to flip it around a little bit, you know, there are unexpected things that happen in deals. Any fun ones? I always enjoy asking people this. Like any really weird, unexpected things you've had come up on a deal, and I'm just curious.
Oh, I mean, lots. You know, I can think of a ton of different environmental issues that popped up that we could have never anticipated in deals. Um, you know, coming out of COVID, I think one of the biggest challenges that we're still trying to get through is the different jurisdictions around the country that put in eviction moratoriums in place
Mm-hmm.
and then allowed them to go on, you know, for extended period of times. And they kind of reset their courts to do a lot of virtual processing and
Right.
haven't gone back to the in-person investment. You know, you know, we've got certain deals in San Francisco and Washington, D.C. that are running, you know, 20% delinquency that you never can underwrite in a model and make sense of, right? I mean, we underwrote those deals at whatever, 3% delinquency, and getting the jurisdictions to understand like, hey, this is just not sustainable.
Sure.
Like, we had a situation in one of those markets where ERAP funds became available again. Those are the Emergency Rental Assistance Program funds. And as soon as folks heard that those were available again, residents of ours or residents of our property management company, they elected to stop paying rent again because they were like, well, I'm gonna,
The government's going
hopefully
to
get,
pay, so
yeah,
why should I pay you?
yeah.
Sure.
And if I don't, then, oh, well, I'm back kind of where I was at type of thing. And
Right.
explaining that to politicians, like, hey, look at this fact pattern, look at what you've created. Like, this is not sustainable. It's not good for the people that are doing the right thing at the communities, right? That are paying their rent, they're being good homeowners. And and residents. And that's really what we've been trying to inform these jurisdictions is like, look at the impact you're having on the good people who are doing the right thing,
Right.
because we're good owners. We're going to continue to fund our deals and make sure, we execute on our business plans as promised to our partners. But like, you're going to have plenty of other bad actors out there that aren't as well capitalized as us that are going to put their hands up and just say, hey, look, this is not sustainable. What do you want to do?
Right, and then they won't pay property taxes, and then the city will have to take the property back, and then the city's going to be stuck with a building with a bunch of people who are not paying, and that doesn't really help anybody.
Yeah.
It is amusing to me that when they assess you for property taxes, if you have a situation like COVID, at least in most jurisdictions I've seen, it's not like they lower your property taxes. They just say, well, it's temporary. You should just keep paying your full taxes. And it's like, but I can't pay my full taxes if I'm not collecting the rent. It's just math. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's been very interesting. The COVID scenario for me, and I think for you too. I mean, if anyone had said to me, I feel like a lot of what happened during COVID is like my undergrad was in econ, and it feels like someone in my sophomore year in college, it would be like a professor's thought experiment. Like, hey, students, if the following crazy things happened, what do you think that would do to the economy? And then you'd sit there at 19 or 20 in class thinking to yourself, well, this is a stupid question. This would never happen. Like, this is just something a prof comes up with, and here we are. So, no, that's interesting to hear you say that. I've heard that echoed from other markets, so it's good to know I'm not alone in hearing that. Speaking of the broader economy, so interest rates have gone, for lack of a better word, I don't want to say crazy, but they've gone up quite a bit. Um, how's that affecting you guys?
It's making doing deals definitely more challenging. We're pretty risk averse in terms of, thinking about how we structure deals, again, speed. One of the reasons that we move fast as well is so we take a lot of the interest rate risk off the table. We historically haven't been a group that likes to bridge deals with floating rate debt for that reason. So, we have some exposure, not a ton exposure, and we're aggressively working through that exposure right now to make sure that, it doesn't become a problem. But I think we kind of see interest rates staying pretty flat from where they are today for the next 2 years. And, it's kind of like coming out of the Great Recession for any of us that have seen multiple cycles, right? One of my mentors at the time, told me, okay, we just came out of this period of time where everybody was making money with a hatchet. And now we're going to move into this time where it's going to be about working with a scalpel. And so, I think we're focused like a lot of people right now about, how can we get more efficient at what we do? Not only executing deals, but also operating deals, really thinking about technology. I mean, AI is on everybody's mind, right? And so, how is AI going to come into the property management space and potentially change the dynamics there to help people, get more data at their fingertips faster to make the right decisions. And so we're opportunistic. We are again well heeled, and we think there's going to be some distress that cycles through in the next 2 years, because obviously there's a ton of deals on floating rate that are worth 30-40% less today than they were when they were closed. And
Right.
so those deals are going to have to be recapped. And I think we're sitting in a really nice position to be a group that many brokers or lenders come to and say, hey, we've got this problem, will you fix it? Again, because of where we are now in our growth cycle as an organization, and also the track record and reputation that we've built, and then the financial resources that we have behind us.
No, and that's all huge. That's all huge. No, and that was going to lead me to the question of plans for the next 12 to 24 months. It definitely sounds like you're the mindset of, there's going to be a major retrenchment, if you will, and so be positioned to take advantage of that in 24, 25, and see where you go. At least the challenge I've seen is, you know, figuring out when that bottom is, per se, right?
Yeah.
It becomes a timing conversation, and you don't want to. It always reminds me of the old joke about the economist who doesn't pick up the $20 bill because he says, well, if there was actually a $20 bill there, someone would have already picked it up. Like,
Mm.
sometimes markets, the markets can sometimes be irrational, so it's tricky finding the right timing. Anyway, last question, just, and I think this is something I wanted to ask you, just because you're in a management role. So you've got these different markets, these different teams. Like, how do you balance from a management standpoint the fact that they are running independently, right? I mean, they're looking at deals and stuff. Like, how do you manage that? Because if you've got four different markets, four different offices with four different team leaders, if you will, what is that like managing that process? I mean, I guess this gets to the heart of what your job is. I'm just trying to understand how do you manage these different teams? Do you benchmark them
I
against
would
each
love to say I
other?
have all. I would love to say I have all the answers to that. It's been kind of my primary focus since coming back in my new role, and it's been a challenge for us. I think the way it's a challenge for most small entrepreneurial shops that grow and become significant.
Not
And
small, sure.
yeah, not small. I mean, when I started with Standard, there was 10 of us, and now there's 90 of us, and we don't property manage. So that gives you kind of a indication of like how many people we have and how much work that we have going on. Um, so I mean, I can tell you the things that we've focused on is we've really kind of turned our attention on a couple of different fronts. Traditionally, right, the great executors become managers and leaders, whether or not they want to be managers and leaders at all. And so we've had to really force our leaders and our important managers to slow down and to spend more time thinking about investing and developing their teams. How can two people create more than one type of thing? And so some of that is doing that scary thing of letting go of control a little bit. Because I think anybody who's been successful in any type of business, control is a huge thing, right? You're trying to drive outcomes. And, we have a core group of people that have been with us for a long time, and they're still very much essential to the work that we're doing. And that's not sustainable going forward at 90 people, right? So we really need to figure out how to get more out of, that larger group. And part of that is investing in training and development and letting them do things and make mistakes, just making sure those mistakes don't become problems, right?
Sure,
Uh,
they're controllable mistakes, yeah.
right. And so, I mean, that's a big thing. We focused on developing true leaders and managers through our ranks. Um, and the other thing is really about communication and transparency. I think that's the biggest thing that, I've seen from kind of our rank and file team members is they want to know more. They feel disconnected from the business. The larger you get, the more spread out, the more kind of specialized functions get. And people, when you're small, everybody's involved in everything, right? And so
Sure.
it's not, you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about how you're communicating because everybody's in the details and the weeds. And as we've grown, everything's gotten more spread out. And then through COVID, we had, virtual work. And
Yeah,
even
work from
now
home.
we're back in the office, but again, we're still in these five offices across the country with team members on the same team in LA and New York. So, it's just how do you effectively communicate what's going on within an organization and provide the level of transparency that people want. I mean, one of the biggest lessons I've learned through this process is around transparency, that people want transparency, but they really want transparency around good and neutral news. When you give them too much transparency around things that could be viewed as bad news, even if it's not bad news, you actually create this interesting dynamic that has you solving more communication needs. So it's I don't know. I'll stop there. It sounds like
No,
you.
it's an excellent point. I mean, you end up I mean, yeah, if you give people negative news that they don't necessarily have the ability to fix because it's not their job function or because it's just not something they can fix, like interest rates go up, um, they get stressed out, and then you're upsetting them about things, and then they feel powerless because they can't fix bad things. So, at the same time, you don't want to just live in some magical world where you only give people good information because then you're just basically lying to, I mean, yeah, like that's not healthy either. No, I hear you. I hear you. It is an interesting question about what does transparency mean and what do we give you to keep you effectively motivated. And your other point about different offices, it's a great point. I mean, it's not like you can all go out for a drink after work. You're physically in different cities, so there's a limit to that. Yeah, it's the that's the one thing I think we've lost a lot in the virtual world, the work from home world, is the soft connections, the dotted line connections, not just interacting with people who are your direct reports, but sort of like, hey, You're not my direct report. We're at the same company, but we get beer every Thursday. That matters. That's social fabric, if you will. So it's interesting. It's
Yeah, the
interesting.
water cooler talk got a bad rap for a long time, right? And as a person who's had the luxury of working remotely as a deal guy for a long time, and then also working in offices and like experiencing both of them for extended period of times, the energy that you get when you're working in close proximity, physical proximity to people who are focused on and motivated by the same things, like it's just everybody spurs the other person, and that
Hmm.
cannot be replicated through a virtual work. And I think the real people that need to understand that and get that, and we're trying to help realize that is the younger generation, the generation just now coming into the space,
Hmm.
who
Hmm.
haven't experienced that before, and like, hey, I can be super efficient on my computer at home, and get things done. But what you're missing is you're missing watching how that senior manager or leader or that deal guy talks to people on the phone, or conducts a meeting, or does a silly thing like the route that they take, the lender or the investor, to see the property, right?
Sure, sure,
Like
sure, sure.
just like the art of doing things versus like the textbook, A to Z. Like much of what we do, right, is more art than it's science. At least people that do it well, the science is the foundation, but it's kind of how you paint the canvas and all of those things. Like I just look back on my own career. I was lucky enough to kind of get handpicked by a CFO at a place that I worked for a couple of years, like within 6 months on the job, to like be their right hand person. And I was in so many meetings that I had no business being in. But the amount of learning that I did in that 3 year span, I wish I could replicate it again.
It's
It was
huge. It's
it was
huge.
amazing.
It's huge.
And so I think that's the piece that, we're trying to help the younger folks that we're hiring here really understand, and like just be that fly on the wall, and be around, because things just rub off on you from the presence.
No, and also if you want to be successful in an organization, the social connections with people in other job functions are very helpful. I mean, you want to get a check cut to a vendor. If you're friends with Phyllis in accounting, you can get the check cut. Whereas if you're not, then guess what? You're in the queue with everybody else. There's a lot to be said for just those the informal horse trading that goes on in any organization to get anything done, because otherwise nothing would ever. It just that's just running an organization. No, it's tricky stuff, and I think your point about generational differences, sadly, I think is going to prove true. I was talking to a colleague of mine who's into demographics a lot, and he was pointing out the obvious of, well, if everyone just works from home and they're not meeting and they're not socializing, what does this do to household formation, 10, 15 years down the road? I mean, you end up, I mean, the risk of, stating the obvious, if you don't socialize, you might not meet anyone and, dot, 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 no marriage, no kids. It could have longer term social impacts, which we will unfortunately not see until, you know, 10 years from now. You got to have that stuff going on. So,
Yeah.
anyway, well, good. Well, look, this has been very constructive. It's good to talk to you about the growth of your firm and also talk a little bit about management stuff. Any closing thoughts or anything else on your mind?
I would just encourage anybody who's listening to this that's interested in affordable housing to reach out to me.
Cool.
We're one of the top 20 owners, developers of affordable housing in the country. And, we like to think we're the best at it. And whether it's opportunities to partner or employment opportunities, we're always looking for, an opportunity to do a good investment. And we're also always looking for the best and the brightest to come work for us. We truly kind of want to be, you know, uh, the Trammell Crow, if you will, of the affordable housing space, or the BlackRock, like kind of be that name that people think about when they think of affordable housing, and that place that spawns all the principals and partners off on all these new ventures. Like they came through the training grounds, if you
The
will,
training ground.
which was Standard Communities.
Right. Yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I mean, you're there definitely bigger than I think your social profile may suggest, if you will, in terms of name recognition. You're much larger. You're not much larger in scope than a lot of other firms who might be better known. So it's always interesting to talk about this. Well, good. Well, then I will say thank you, and for everyone listening, we'll be back again in a week. And I guess what I always like to say to people is if you haven't subscribed, please do. And if you know someone who might be a good guest for the podcast, you know where to reach me. Just check out the website, send me an email. Thanks again, Joe, and best of luck.
Thanks, Josh.